So the VP debate last night, I thought that J.D. Vance was spectacular. And that's what most people on the right are saying. You might say that, well, of course we were going to say that, but I for one have shown a willingness to admit when a Republican performs poorly in a debate. And in this case, he just performed really well. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say it's maybe the best debate performance I've seen in my lifetime. I can't think of a better one. There's nothing that comes to mind. Certainly, it's the best in the past decade or more. Vance is so much better at this than Tim Walz. That was clear last night. He's so much better at it than Kamala Harris. And he's also much better at it than Donald Trump. Vance can do the thing that Trump can't, which is deliver a focused, substantive answer that stays on message. Trump, of course, has a much more freewheeling kind of style, which has clearly served him well. But in a debate, in this kind of debate, it's not always effective. The best debate style is what we saw from Vance last night. Calm, cool, collected, very smooth, very eloquent, substantive. And that's what he delivered. I thought it was tremendous. As we talked about on Backstage last night, the media and the Democrats really unintentionally did Vance a favor. They set him up for success because for weeks and weeks, they'd been blabbering about how Vance is weird and he's awkward and he's just this strange guy. They've been saying that's how they branded him. The branding was totally divorced from reality. There have been plenty of awkward politicians. We know that. Vance is not really one of them. There have been weird politicians. Vance was on the stage with a weird politician yesterday. But he's not weird himself. He is, if anything, aggressively normal. If you want to insult him in a way that has some relation to reality, you would say that he's boring, right? You'd say he's too normal, if anything. There's nothing exciting about him. Now, I don't find him boring personally, but I'm saying if you were trying to criticize him in any kind of honest way, that's the direction you would go. But instead, they called him weird. So that's where they set the bar. He's this weird, awkward guy. So that means that if you're a kind of clueless, kind of ignorant, not paying attention sort of American, then you turn on the debate last night expecting to see this weird, bizarre, awkward, cringy freak up there. And instead you get this dude who's totally comfortable, doesn't break a sweat, handling the debate with ease. And so now you're even more impressed. They set Vance up to be more impressive than he actually is. And I think that he's already very impressive. So, that was interesting to see. It was a narrative versus reality moment that I think was extremely favorable to J.D. Vance. So all that to say, Vance won the debate easily. Walz did better than Kamala. He actually did better than I thought that he would in general. He didn't totally melt down. He had a few rough moments in there, a few moments that didn't go well for him. Especially when he was asked about his lies about going to China and that sort of thing. Some of the embellishments from his personal history. That was the closest that Walsh came to really melting down. He was a deer in the headlights, and which is fascinating that he didn't have an answer ready for that stuff, but he didn't, and that was a rough moment. Aside from that, Walsh, he was fine. It was like a C+. I give him a C+ for Walsh. I graded about a 78%, let's say. But Vance was a 95%. And that was Walsh's problem. Overall, he did okay, but he's competing against someone who's an A+. And that means that, all told, the debate itself was pretty boring. When you got a high C+ against an A+, kind of makes for a boring debate. And I have to say, I don't say that as a complaint. I kind of like that it was boring. I think I miss boring debates. And I think a lot of Americans feel this way. I want politics in general to be boring again. And you make it boring by having just competent, serious people in these positions. And so I think that's good. It was kind of refreshing. Yeah, when you think back to the least boring debate I've ever seen was the first Trump debate against Biden, or the only Trump debate against Biden. To see the President of the United States just disintegrating right in front of us it was not boring. I'll say that for it. It certainly was not boring. It was the most fascinating. I couldn't take my eyes off it. I think that's one of those debates you're going to remember for the rest of your life, because I'd never seen anything like it. That debate with a president who cannot speak. So it was fascinating. It wasn't boring, but that's what makes this debate refreshing. It's like, okay, there's just two people answering the questions. That's fine. So there weren't many fireworks. It was a very friendly debate. Vance was being strategically nice, which was not emotionally satisfying for me to watch, but I get the tactic. Probably the right call, all things considered. The closest thing to fireworks was probably this moment where Vance fact checks the moderators who were trying to fact check him on the Haitian immigrant problem. Let's watch that.
And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status. Right. Temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
The rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut.
So that was very good. Not by the moderators, that they looked like fools, but from Vance jumping in there and fact-checking the fact-check was great. That was what I was missing from Trump's last debate. He never really took it to the moderators, never called them out. And he was getting dishonestly, quote-unquote, fact-check again and again and again, and Trump never pointed that out. He never said, hey, you're fact-checking me, but not him. Also, by the way, your fact-checks are inaccurate. So I was hoping Vance would go this direction, and he did. And it was good. It was also the last time in the debate that the moderators tried to do a dishonest fact-check of Vance. So the move worked. I mean, it paid off. It had the desired effect, and that was good. I thought one of Vance's best moments was this, where he's talking about the very difficult job that Walsh was facing during the debate, given who he was there to represent. Let's watch that.
If you notice, what Governor Walsh just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics show that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on healthcare then.
So that was a very skillful answer. And this is where Vance shines, when he's delivering a lot of information and covering a lot of ground, but doing it smoothly and efficiently. What we heard there was a pretty searing, comprehensive indictment of the Kamala administration in about 60 seconds, which isn't easy to do. And that's why I actually thought Vance's most impressive moment happened at the very beginning of the debate. I don't think this moment made a lot of people's highlight reels, but it was Vance's very first answer, which I thought was kind of a masterclass. Listen up, folks. We talk a big game about traditional values, but how many of us are actually walking the walk when it comes to prayer? Let's be honest with ourselves for a moment. Most of us are about as consistent with our prayer life as Congress is with balancing the budget. We've all been there. Prayer feels so daunting to get started. We end up not doing it at all. We make excuses. I'm too busy. I don't know how. I'll do it tomorrow. List goes on. Enter Hallow, the #1 prayer and meditation app, and they're starting a new series called How to Pray. Here's the deal. 2 weeks, daily sessions, no fluff, with guided prayers being led by guests like Mark Wahlberg and Jonathan Rumi. You'll learn how to pray with scripture while getting familiar with prayers that have been around in church history for centuries. They've got everything from prayers to help your kids navigate the chaos of a new school year to prayers for athletes looking to up their mental game. Look, whether you're a prayer novice or a seasoned pro, Hallow's got something for you. Who knows? You might even become a slightly less annoying person to be around. Miracles do happen. So do yourself a favor. Put down the remote, close Twitter, and download Hallow at hallow.com/Matt Walsh for an exclusive 3-month free trial. That's hallow.com/Matt Walsh for an exclusive 3-month free trial of all 10,000 plus prayers and meditations. And I don't have the clip, but the debate started with a question about the war in the Middle East. And Vance begins his answer by saying that that he wants to introduce himself first, and then he'll answer. Then he goes into his backstory about growing up in Ohio and all of that, kind of giving the back of the book summary of Hillbilly Elegy, essentially. And when he first started his answer, and he said he wanted to introduce himself, I thought, oh no, JD, what are you doing? You can't. There's no way you can do an introductory bit about yourself and then transition into the war in the Middle East in 2 minutes and make it sound fluid and natural. This is going to be awkward. It's going to be an awkward, disjointed answer. And you're going into this thing, you've already been branded as an awkward, disjointed guy. And now you're going in with this, and this is a bad move, I thought to myself when he first started talking. But he pulled it off. It was really impressive. He pulled it off. He somehow managed to give like a 60-second autobiography of himself, and then he still answered the foreign policy question, and it all worked. He made the transition. That's not easy to do. I say this as someone who is in the public speaking business also, different kind of public speaking, different context, obviously, but public speaking all the same. And from that perspective, again, very impressive. This is one thing it's easy to lose sight of, that the modern debate format, and I complain about the modern presidential debate format all the time because it's ridiculous, really. Giving people 1 to 2 minutes to answer questions. It's not enough time covering. Really, they cover too much ground in these debates, which might sound counterintuitive, but they just talk about too many things. And really, what we want to hear is what we should hear is a lengthy discussions about the most important issues. We don't need to cover 20 different topics for 1 minute each. How about cover like 3 or 4 for 30 minutes each? That's what I would like to see. That's the debate format that would be much more productive and tell us much more about these guys. But this debate format, even though I think it's a lot less revealing, it tells us less, it is a very difficult. It's a high degree of difficulty. It's easy to lose sight of that. Giving 1 to 2 minute answers, saying everything you want to say in 1 to 2 minutes, while avoiding the stuff you don't want to say on national television, right? Most high pressure situation. Extremely difficult. And we should all appreciate that to some degree now, because we've seen in the last several years some truly awful performances in that forum. I mean, we've seen what it looks like when you've got people in there who really, this is not their skill set, and it is a total meltdown. It's terrible. Again, Biden bombed so hard that he had to drop out. Like that's how bad it can be. And but for Vance, he's in his element in this kind of thing. I also think he would do really well in a better format where they could talk at greater length. want to move on to this. I did want to discuss one of the issues from the debates. In fact, this is one of the issues that they should not have covered, because it's not an issue for the federal government to solve. But even so, the conversation turned to what was described as the childcare crisis. And let's just watch a little bit of that, and then we'll talk about it.
There is a childcare crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walsh, you said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family and medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family and medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born.
His answer doesn't really matter. It's more the question, and they both answered it, and they both gave a spiel about what the government should do to solve this problem of the childcare crisis. And so I want to say a few things about this, none of which will be popular. I don't have a popular view on this. I understand that. And I'm setting myself up to be attacked as a cruel, heartless person who doesn't understand and all that kind of stuff. And I get all that, and that's going to happen, whatever. First of all, can we just calm down for a moment? Not everything is a crisis. Not every problem we face as a country is a crisis. It is possible to have an issue, an important issue, a problem even, in your country that is not a national crisis. But what happens is we call every problem a crisis. If we recognize that there's a problem in the country, it's automatically a crisis. And so the word has no meaning anymore. It doesn't mean anything. We label everything a crisis automatically. And so now when you call something a crisis, it doesn't, I don't know. That does not tell me anything about this problem, how serious it is. Second thing, more to the point, if childcare is a crisis, or if it's a problem but not a crisis, however we describe it, the issue is not primarily a lack of affordable daycare. It's not a lack of paid family leave. The crisis, just using the word, we'll stick with that word for the sake of argument. The crisis is being driven not by a lack of affordability, but by single motherhood. Okay? So can we just be honest about that? Now, yes, I realize that there are married couples with kids who struggle to find affordable childcare options. I get that. I know that. But the thing that brings it to crisis level, if that's the level that it's at, the primary thing driving that is that we have far too many people having kids but not getting married, or having kids but not staying married. That is what's driving this primarily. What's the solution? Get married first, then have kids, then stay married. That's the solution. If we are not doing that, then there will never be a solution. Childcare, here's another hot take for you. Childcare is not an issue for the government to solve. This is not an issue for the federal government. You should not be looking to the President of the United States to figure out childcare solutions for you. I mean, do you realize how insane that is? Looking to the president to figure out childcare solutions. I mean, does the president need to come into our kitchens and make us dinner too? Like, at what point does it become a problem for us to solve? Are there any problems that just American families solve on their own anymore? And maybe not even entirely on their own, with their own families, with their own communities. But is there any part of our lives anymore that we don't turn to the federal government to figure out for us? Can there be any aspect of our lives that we say, well, you know what, this is probably not for you guys? So, you know, and I say this as someone who has experience with these challenges. Because I'm automatically going to be accused, well, you don't know what it's like. Yeah, I do. I was making $40K a year when we had our first two kids. We had twins, first kids. And that's a family of four on a $40,000 income, not poverty level wages. Doesn't qualify as poverty level wages for a family of four, but it's not rich. It's a big challenge, you know, taking care of a family of four on that income. And so we had this problem. We faced this problem many people have faced, and where it's like, well, I'm the one earning the income. Now we've got four mouths to feed here and not a lot of money to do it with. We got all the other expenses, all the other things that we have to pay for, the rent and the car and everything, the groceries. And we said, well, my wife could go to work and earn an income also, but then if she does that, then we got to pay for daycare for the kids. And we also lived in Kentucky at the time. We were 8 hours away from our nearest family member, so we were totally isolated from any family or anybody we knew, friends. You know, there was nobody around that we knew and or we could depend on. And so it was a big challenge. And what we decided to do in our case was my wife did not go to work. She stayed home with the kids, and we didn't incur that childcare cost. Also, we wanted her to be with our children. And it was a big sacrifice. It was hard. It was hard. And ultimately, well, the decision we finally made was to pick up and move, to leave. We put our two kids and all of our stuff into a car, and we drove back to Maryland. We made the 8-9 hour drive, and we just decided we got to be around. We got to have some kind of support system around us. And that's not easy to do. Like, you can't talk about moving like it's the easy. That's not an easy solution. So when someone is facing something like what we were facing, where you don't have any support system, I know what that's like. And someone says, well, why don't you just move to where your family is? Not as easy as that. That's not a simple thing to do. But ultimately, it's what we did. It was very, very difficult. We did it. And I guess the point is that at no point during that process did I ever think to myself, what is the President of the United States going to do about this? At no point. Many conversations with my wife about how are we going to, what are we doing here? How are we going to make all this work? At no point did we say, what's the president going to do about it? Never even crossed my mind. Because there are some problems that are not for the federal government to solve. And there are some problems that when the federal government tries to solve them, they just make it worse. And I think that this is one of those problems. Of course, the great, really morbid irony here is that many of the people who say that childcare is a problem for the federal government to solve would be the first to say that the decision of whether or not you kill your child to begin with, the federal government should have nothing to do with that. So the federal government should have no say in whether your child gets to live or not. But once you decide that your child's going to live, now it's the federal government's job to figure out how you're going to care for your kid. We not see any kind of disconnect there? So you're saying the government should have whether or not your child gets to live in the first place is no concern of the government's. But then if you decide the child is going to live, now it's an issue that the government needs to solve for you. So we want the government to go from total disregard for your child's life to, oh, this is our issue. We need to, it's like, there's a disconnect here, I would say. There is not a disconnect the other way, though. For the government to say, you know what, you can't kill your child. Like, we're not going to get involved in your family and tell you, figure out childcare for you and all that. We're not going to do that. But you can't kill your child. Like, there's no hypocrisy there. That's not a disconnect. It's just like basic laws that govern society. You can't deliberately harm your child. But to flip it around the other way is just totally backwards and bizarre. And so, yeah, Tim Walz. We don't need Tim Walz. I don't need Tim Walz. And now with 6 kids, I don't need Tim Walz to tell me anything about how to care for my kids. I don't need his help. I don't want it. I don't want the president to get involved. I got it. Thank you, though. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to listen to my full podcast on the go, you can check out The Matt Walsh Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.